Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about two nice features of Alamofire, which is API router and the interceptor. These days, people are connected more than earlier. They are having high speed connections always, which means we need to be in real time so that our apps needs to make lot more API calls. Our app need to handle more APIs than earlier. uh, so how do we manage that? We can manage the API handling through plist, like structuring your APIs or using any constant classes, or in different network manager classes for different API. There are multiple ways to do that. And when it comes to handling of headers, authentication, etc., it can become a bit cumbersome. In this scenario, the API router provided by Alamofire is of great use. Also, these days, login feature of an app is really common. Whenever you download an app to use premium features or something like that, you have to log in, providing your credentials. And once you log in, under the hood, you will be getting your app will be getting a token, which is like a long string, which is later used to call your other APIs other than login, which helps in automatically signing in that you are the user. Uh, Usually, for security reasons, these tokens expires very often, and usually it's like 1 hour. We can handle these scenarios in multiple ways. One way to handle is when your token gets expired, your following API calls will start failing by a 401 error. During that scenario, you can pop up a login screen to the user and ask the user to enter the username and password. But that's not a really good experience. Like every 1 hour, you throwing in a login screen, which is really not nice. Maybe for a banking application, it might be good, but for other apps like CPG or retail apps, it can be really not nice. What's the other option? Like you can handle this under the hood. For example, you can save the user's credential securely in a keychain, or in a secure vault, or in core data with an encryption. And then when you hit this 401 error, you can grab this information and re-log in under the hood. So that way you can refresh the token and make sure that your APIs are continuously working. Again, there is one more thing on top of this. uh, let's say you hit an API and you got a 401 error. You have to do a refresh token. After refreshing the token, you have to again fire the failed request. So there is lots of management involved here. One way is you can create your own network manager class, like a base class which has some array to grab the failed request. And once you get a new token from the backend, you can iterate through this array and then retry all these requests. It worked, but bit work to do this approach. But the feature newly available in Alamofire, which is called Interceptor, it helps. It leverages, or it abstracts lots of these kind of things for us. uh, so we are going to discuss that in this video. In this video, I don't have any live demo as such, because most of the APIs which I am using is bit proprietary, so I cannot expose that. So I will, as always, I will just walk you through the source code which I have written. I mean, it will be generic code. You will be knowing the concept. Okay, so let's start looking into the code right now. Okay, first of all, I have created my own network manager. It's just a simple class which is a singleton class which has a session is from Alamofire. So you will be importing the Alamofire module. In this particular video I'm using Alamofire beta 6, and this network manager just has only one method. It will accept a request, execute it, and send back the JSON response or error. That's it. So there will be other manager classes who will handle those response and according to the APIs that's being called. So it's just simple as that. So you create a session, this is Alamofire session, and just make a request, and the usual stuff. You get the response, parse it, and send the completion, like if it is an error or it's a success. So that's what pretty much this class does. Nothing great. So apart from the usual Alamofire stuff, in order for the interceptor to work, you have to use the session object rather than the AF object. So usually we use the AF dot request. So here we will be using the session directly, so that we can set up the interceptor. So I will come to these things later when we come to that. Then I have the API router. Let's discuss the API router first. So API router is a URL request convertible conforming enum. So here we can, what it does is, here we can manipulate your APIs the way you want, like defining the paths, defining the authentication headers, defining anything else, so which is very helpful. Here I have defined few enums. One is like HTTP header fields, the usual stuff like authentication, content type, encoding, request name, etc. Then the content type. Then so these are the request name, sample requests which I am going to create here. So one is to authenticate user and one is to fetch data, which is pretty generic. Then you have your main API router. In this API router we will define the base URL. So for example, all the APIs will have a domain, the base domain. So the base domain will be defined here. This can vary from test, prod, or staging environment. You can either define it in a constants and fetch it according to the environment, or you can have it defined as a user defined parameter in the build settings, so that based on the scheme your base URL will change. Then we are defining the two cases here, two case to handle, authenticate user and fetch data. And you can see this authenticate user will take an array of string any, which is going to be the credentials that you are passing, and fetch data is a get call. It will take only the token, so which will get appended as your header. And now here we define the HTTP method. So we, like for authenticate user, we want the method to be post, so we'll be posting some information. Fetch data is going to be get. So similarly, if you have any more API calls, you can just define like that, the dot fetch data for user, maybe post, because you might be passing some user ID or something like that, or update some value. So like that you can define multiple API calls to a particular HTTP method. And then here comes the path, like which gets appended to your base URL, like the base URL plus auth, authenticate user, or API fetch data, which can be anything. Now comes the authentication header. So like for authenticate user, we are not going to pass any token or anything like that. We'll be just passing the username or password. Then later, once we get the token, and for the fetch data, you will be returning the token string. We will come further down, we will be using all these values. Then the request name, this is a custom header field where in which we are just sending the request name that we have defined here, just to know like which was the request. And okay, and then the encoding. So for the fetch data, I just put JSON encoding, and the authenticate user, I'm using URL encoding. So based on the API definition, you can change it whatever way you want. Now this is the main function where in which we use all this information that we had defined and create a URL request. So first thing is like you need to define the parameters. So as you can see, if the API call is authenticate user, we will send back the credentials. And for fetch data, since it is a get request, we do not have any param, so just leave it. If there is any param, you can put it there. Then we will be getting the base URL. Then we will be getting the path. So when we call the path, based on the case or the switch case, based on the API, it will take the correct path. So if it is authenticate user, you will get the OAuth authenticate user. If it is fetch data, you will get API.fetch data. So like even if you have like 10-15 API calls, you can just define yet another case. That's it. No more changes over here. So you will just add and delete on these, work on these enums, and it's very easy to manage. And you finally create a URL request by appending the path and the base URL. Then set the HTTP method. So you just take the raw value, and based on the API case, or based on which is the API, you will the right method will be set. Then you are getting the authorization header and request name header, and attaching it to the authentication and request name header fields. And finally encode, set the encoding. So the encoding will be fetched from here, like based on the API that is being called. That's all. So this API router manages all your APIs, the parameters and the token, all these things which is required by the API, and the method to be used, the request names, handling the authorization headers, encoding everything. So like if you are going to have more APIs, what you will simply do is add another case and define the values for the new case over here. That's it. So that's how API router can help you in managing your APIs. So at one place you manage everything. Cool. Then comes the auth manager. Okay, this is just again one class, is just to do the authentication call. So let's say when you start the app, we will make the authenticate user with just a completion. Either you fetch the credentials from the credential storage or keychain or something, and then call the network manager to execute this. So this is how you call, like API router, authenticate user, and pass the credential. That's it. So your creation of the whole URL request will be handled by the API router. And once the execution is successful or error, you will get the data over here. And this class will get the token, and probably you will be saving this token somewhere for later use, so that the API router can take the token either from a storage credential, core data, or it can be passed by the caller. Maybe for example, like if you have a fetch data, API router uh, dot fetch data. In this string you will be passing the token. So you can, I mean, it's up to you, you can define whichever way you want. So that is auth manager and API router. Okay, let's now look at the network interceptor. So network interceptor is a is derived from interceptor, which is further derived from request interceptor. So interceptor has lots of properties like adapters, retriers, and few methods. Here I'm not using any multiple adapters or multiple retriers. I'm just keeping it simple. There will be only one of these, and I'm creating a new token value and an auth manager over here, just to handle the re-authentication. Then you have two important methods, which is adapt and retry. So adapt is the method through which all the APIs will go through. So whenever an API is fired, it will come into the adapt and then proceed. So if you want any further action which needs to be applied on this API request, we can do it here, like which we couldn't have done with the API router. So those changes, like here what I'm doing is I'm just checking whether all the request is having the required request name. If the request name is having is present, then we will check whether the request name is fetch data, and we will try to append the new token value. If there is no new token value, we will take the one which is existing and then fire the request. And this is not really needed over here, because we are already doing this from the API router. But this is I just put it just to show you how you can manipulate your request further. Maybe something else you want to set specifically only for this request, then you can do something like this. Get the request and then set a specific value. Maybe this particular request need a different header which no other request requires, or something like that. Then you can do it over here. Then we have another method called retry. So in this retry, we'll be checking only for authentication error, like 401 errors, and we will be doing a maximum of 3 retries. Like if after 3 retries things doesn't work, then something is really wrong. We will show the user to call the support or something like that. So here this is how we are checking the Alamofire, and this request will have a retry count. So we will be checking whether the retry count is still 3. If it is more than 3, then we will just fail it. So in this block we will try to re-authenticate the user. We will be calling the auth managers method from here. So the auth manager will internally fetch the credentials that we have already stored, and then try to call the network manager and re-authenticate the user. So after re-authentication, you will be getting the new token. You either maybe here you can save it to storage for later use, and set this token to the local field in this network interceptor. And then in the completion, you ask the system to interceptor to do a retry. So here we are not really tracking which requests were failed, but that is internally handled by the interceptor for us. And if we don't want any retry, we'll just pass do not retry. Like if any of the error is not 401, then you don't retry, you directly throw the error. So that's all. I mean, so if you implement the network interceptor, it will be very easy for you to handle. Usually if you don't have any special need to adapt, you don't necessarily to implement anything over here maybe. And in the retry you can do the things here, like check for 401 errors, then check the retry count. This is really important, like if you don't handle the retry count, you will end up in a loop maybe. And inside this you make a pre-authentication call, get the new token and tell the interceptor to do a retry. Even if it is error, you will need to do a retry, because then only you will be able to do the count. Otherwise it will fail in the first retry itself. Then if you do not want to retry, just return do not retry, so that the completion block will continue and the user will be seeing an error. Yeah, so that's all. Okay, now let's go to the network manager and see like how you initialize an interceptor. So you create a network interceptor with retriers with retry policy, retry limit 3. Due to some reason this didn't work, that's why I had to add it explicitly like this. Then assign the interceptor to this session. So I just create this session as a property of this network manager. If you create it in the method, what I faced was like the session was getting closed immediately and your retry and adapt was not working, so I have to make it as a retained value or a property of the network manager. Yeah, so that's all with this. So we have seen API router, how easy is to handle or manage all the APIs in your project by using simple enums and cases using the API router. And then we have seen the network interceptor. We have gone through the adapt and the retry methods and how to use retry, how to stop retrying, all these things. Then in the network manager we have seen how to create a session and set up a network interceptor and create a session with the interceptor parameter. That's all. Please try it out and see it. It's really nice. It works very well. And one more thing, like most of the applications which I have tried, I have only synchronous calls. I don't have multiple calls running simultaneously or in parallel. So I haven't really tried this exact approach with that. Just keep in mind, for me, like there is only one request to be retried at one point of time. There is no simultaneous stuffs. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Bye bye.